All right, here we are, last chapter. Can't imagine you're here already, do you? I was made aware that we did tectonics in last chapter. I found this shirt in my drawer. So if you think back into chapter 11, we talked about tectonics and volcanoes. This is the one that my wife went to in Costa Rica. It's Mount Arenal. She was at the base of it, said it was pretty cool. One of these days, maybe I'll get a go. Chapter 18 is going to kind of go into the last part of the lithosphere. We're going to look at soils. Now, there is a difference between soils and dirt. Okay, things live in soils. Dirt is basically dead. Okay, there's not as much nutritional value to it. So when we look at soils, one of the first things we have to do is look at what makes it up. There's four basic pieces. Inorganic material, which is things that are not living, so it's rocks and sands and minerals and things like that. Water and air, and then what's known as organic matter. And organic matter is anything that is living in the soils. Could be a bug, could be an animal, could be a bacteria or a protozoa, or it could be something that was once living and is now dead and decaying. So if fruit falls off a tree, nobody eats it, and it starts to break down, that was an organic material. It will put organic material into your soil. The percentages of these change depending upon where you're at in the world. For the most part, the book talks about this being like a 45% inorganic, 25% water, 25% air, and 5% organic. Now this is just kind of a universal percentage. If you look at a desert, this is going to be much higher. Inorganic will go way up because it's mostly sand and dirt. Water will decrease dramatically, air will increase, and organic is virtually not there. If you compare that to, say, the soils here in central Illinois, you're looking at inorganic dropping down to probably down into the 40s or upper 30%. Water and air will increase, and organic will almost double. Okay, so you can play around with the things when you start putting together gardens. If you're putting down a flower bed, if you're trying to grow some grass in your yard, you will monkey around with all of these and increase the organics, which will then increase water and air, and you will drop your inorganics automatically. Okay. One of the things about soils is soils can tell you a lot just by looking at them. They have characteristics such as color, texture, and structure. If you are looking to buy some land and build out in the country somewhere because you don't like living in the city, the color of the soil can tell you, yes, it's good soil, or no, it's bad soil. Okay, depends upon what you want to use the soil for. Colors like red, black, brown, white, gray, beige, and so on. There's a host of colors. Red is soils that if you go down into northern Texas, if you're in Oklahoma, for example, you will see red soils that tells you there's a lot of iron in it. Red is because of the rust between the iron in the soils, the water and the air and the atmosphere, and it turns to rust, so that's the red. Black soil tells you it's highly organic, grows everything. Brown, not as organic, but still pretty good dirt. White or gray sometimes is known as timber soil. There's lots of calcification in that soil. You can grow some things, it's not highly organic. Beige, if you're looking at beige soil, that means there's a lot of sand in it. So this would be great if you want something to drain, very bad if you're trying to build a house on it. Texture can be brought about by actually picking up the soil and feeling it with your fingers. If it's got a gritty feel to it, there's a lot of sand in it. If it feels sticky, if you get it a little bit wet, it's sticky or tacky, that means there's a lot of clay in it. Clay tells you that it's great to build on. You have a very solid foundation, that the ground will stay solid for you. The downside of that is clay soils will not allow anything to grow because it's like when it gets hot, it will turn into a brick. Silky means you have a lot of silt in it. And I'm going to show you the different pieces of material that go into soil here in a minute. So silky is kind of the medium piece. So when you're walking, if you ever walk barefoot into a creek or a river or into a lake, and you feel that really silky squish of mud between your toes, this is, like I said, the medium piece of soil. It's between the size of sand and the size of clay. Structure, you can have all different kinds of structures. You can have powdery soils that basically just blow up as soon as you put a shovel in it. Grainy, which would be basically how you would determine or describe sandy soils. Rough pieces, if you put a shovel in the ground, turn it in, you have some pieces that are roughly edged. That means that there's a little bit of drainage in there, but there's a little bit more clay. If it comes out clumpy where you have just big pieces, that means that you have a lot of clay in your soil. And you can have soils that are known as gelatinous. And gelatinous, I guess there's no other real easy way to describe it. If you've ever sneezed and caught it in your hand, that's the kind of feel or structure that this type of soil would have. It's kind of a wet, gooey, sticky type of a feel. Gelatinous soils are those that are usually found when water and soil are mixing heavily. Swamps, bogs, places like that would be an example of gelatinous soils. Okay, so looking at what a soil is made of as far as piece size, if you look at a piece of sand, the sand is irregularly shaped, it's very large. Silt, like I said, is a medium piece, and then there's clay, okay? So you've all played in sand, and you say, sand isn't that big. Well, sand, in looking at the prospects of pieces of soil, sand is the biggest piece that makes up your soils. Silt is the medium, and clay is so small, okay? So when you start looking at pieces of clay or pieces of sand sitting next to each other, they don't fit very tight. So this area right here is known as a pore, and this is what air and water can go through. This is why sand doesn't hold water very well, because it's like a sieve. There's these huge gaps between the pieces. If you put silt together, silt is still not going to be tightly packed, but you're not going to have as big of a pore in there. So your pore is in here in the middle. And then if you take clay, clay doesn't have any pores. That's why the water sits on top. Okay. Baseball diamonds, for example, are made of clay, so that when it rains, the water stays on top. Squeegee it off, throw down some diamond dry, and you're ready to play. Okay. Sandy soils don't stay wet very long because the water drains right through them. One of the most important things about soils is their chemistry. Okay. One of the first things in chemistry is known as the clay-humus complex. First of all, you got to understand what humus is, okay? Humus is basically anything organic. Sticks that fall off of trees, leaves that fall, you cut your grass, the grass clippings, dead flowers, whatever was once living is now dead, laying on the soil and breaking down, is going to turn into what's called humus. It's just finely divided, broken down organic matter. You can also look at humus as, maybe you've heard the word compost, okay? You see people rake up leaves and let them sit for the entire fall through the winter, then they come back in the spring and they're this kind of molten gelatinous mass of goo. That's compost. So you take that, you throw it into your soon-to-be vegetable garden or your flower bed, you work it into the soil, and you're giving it a lot of different things. One, you're giving it free fertilizer, and it's the right kind of fertilizer. It's exactly what the plants need. It helps reduce compaction in the soil, keeps the soils fluffy so you can get air and water in there. It increases water retention. So this stuff works like a sponge. So you throw this in the soil, you water your soils, instead of the water going down and out of the way, it goes in, it absorbs into this humus layer, and it stays there for a couple extra days before it comes out. So your roots have 2 more days, maybe 3 more days of water. And the other thing it does is it helps protect the roots. It helps keep them from freezing too soon. It keeps them warm in the winter. It also keeps them cool in the summer. Okay, so there's a lot of places that have direct sunlight. Above ground, the plant maybe loves sunlight, but the roots maybe like cool. So you put a bunch of humus in the soil to keep the roots happy, and that keeps the upper part happy also. So when you put clay together, remember clay was like this, you have all sorts of different little pieces in here and no air or water can get through. If you throw humus in there, humus could be all sorts of different sizes and shapes. You break up where that clay was, so now you have areas in here that water can get through. So here's pores, here's a pore. So you break up the soil, you're increasing the aeration of the soil, you're letting water get through, you have gas exchange. You can also allow this humus to become fertilized. This will break down and these pores will slowly get smaller as this breaks down and the plant utilizes it for food. But this helps break up poor soils. The second one is known as the cation exchange capacity. This is otherwise known as the CEC. The CEC is basically this. So water is going to come down from the sky as rain or snow or ice or whatever. It's going to hit the soil, it's going to infiltrate. Water is going to be bipolar. Remember, there's hydrogens in here and there's hydroxyls in here. So there's positives and there's negatives. In the soils, there's zinc, there's aluminum, there's lead, there's all different things in the soils that have an ionic charge. So let's say, for example, there's something in here that has a negative charge in it. Whatever this is something maybe you don't want to drink, you don't want to get into groundwater. Since these are positive, it's going to pull that material out and actually clean the water as it runs through the soil. If you think back to chapter 9, we talked about aquifers, and I said as water penetrates the soil and it hits that porous layer of rock, as the water goes through the soil, it's actually getting cleaned. It passes through, say, limestone, which is right here, and it starts dripping into the aquifer. This is clean water when it hits there. This is why people that live in the rural communities can just put a pipe down in the ground, pump it in their house. It's ready to use. It's potable because you have this cation exchange capacity in the soils. Okay, so it's kind of like a natural Brita filter or pure water system. Okay, and the third one, which is probably one of the most important ones, is pH. Now, I'm sure you guys have all seen a pH scale. And you know that pH is basically talking about two things, acids and bases, okay? And we know that 7 is considered neutral. It's neither an acid or a base. So acids are going to go from 6.9 down to 1.0. It's going to get stronger on the lower number. It's weak up by the 7. The base is going to do the same thing. This is a weak base at 7.1. And if you get down to 14, it's very strong. Okay. Now, what you might not know is what pH stands for. Okay, the H is capitalized because it talks about hydrogen. The P stands for percent. So you've known that you've got numbers. You know that 6 is an acid, but 5 is stronger of an acid. How much stronger? Is it 1 time stronger? It's actually 10 times stronger. Every movement between numbers is a 10 times logarithmic movement. Okay. So if you have a pH of 1 and a pH of 3, 1 isn't 2 times stronger, it's 10 times 10, which is 100 times stronger, okay? The pH is given a number because as you work your way to the left in acids, you're getting rid of more hydrogens. The amount of hydrogen left when you have a strong acid is less. The bubbles, when you throw metal into an acid, you see the bubble and steam come out. That steam isn't steam. It's hydrogen gas coming up. So it's giving off tremendous amounts of hydrogen, which will then decrease the percentage of hydrogen, decrease the pH, so then your number gets lower. If it holds more hydrogen, the number would get higher. Okay, so that's what we're doing on the base side. On the base side, you've got numbers that go up to 14. So they keep hydrogen, but they will get rid of something known as OH minus, which is hydroxyl. Acids give off the hydrogen ion, okay? So here's a couple things. If you have a house or a yard that doesn't have very much grass growing in it, how do you fix that? Well, first thing you gotta do is one, make sure you've got pore space. Make sure that you have drainage. Simple thing, put a coffee can into the ground, cut off both ends, sit in the ground about an inch so it doesn't fall over, fill it with water, walk away for a day. Come back the next day, see how much water, if any, is left in the can. If you have less than half a can of water in there, then your drainage is fine. Then there must be another problem. If there's more than a half a can, your major problem is air and water can't get in there. So you have to break that soil up and add humus, okay? Or you can add sand. If it's something else, the first thing you want to look at other than porosity and permeability is pH. Okay, most plants like to stay between 6.5 and 8 as a pH. That's a pretty good range. It doesn't sound like it mathematically, but in pH world, it's a pretty big difference. If your pH is off, how do you change it? If your pH is too basic, how do you drop it to become more acidic? How do you drop it from like a 9 down to a 7? It's very simple. You go out into somewhere that has pine trees, rake up the pine needles, take them out in your yard, sprinkle them around your yard, turn a sprinkler on, and let it go. Pine trees are naturally acidic. The pine needles are naturally acidic. If you run water over those, they will leach the acid out of those pine needles and put it in the soil and slowly start dropping the pH of your soil. Okay, it's free. If you've got an area that's too acidic and you want to bump it up a number or two, if it's a small area, you can just take eggshells. If you've used eggs for making an omelet or fried eggs or whatever, take the eggshells, crush them up, put them out in the yard, and do the same thing with the sprinkler. The eggshells will then neutralize the acid and bring it back up more of a base. Okay, again, it's not necessarily free because you have to buy the eggs, but at least it's something that you can do that's not very expensive. If you have your whole yard needs to do that, I don't think that eggshells are going to work. You'll have to go out and get some what is called lime, L-I-M-E, not limes that you buy for margaritas, but lime that you chalk fields with, and sprinkle that out in your yard and then run the sprinkler system on that, and that will start to raise your pH also. The next part that we're going to do is going to be looking at a breakdown of soils by looking at them through horizons and layers, and then we're going to decide how we're going to create soils. There is a recipe for that, and then how you break them apart.